Hey everyone, Brian here wishing you a great Friday and a wonderful weekend ahead. In this series, we've been looking at the voice of the soul as we find it in Holy Scripture. And thus far, we've been looking at certain personalities in the Hebrew Scriptures. We're going to continue to work our way through some other figures in the Hebrew Scriptures. We're just on the brink of looking at a whole group of writings in the Old Testament called the books of the prophets. And then we'll dabble also in the New Testament. It's the ongoing thesis of this series that the authors of the Bible, from Genesis all the way through to Revelation, were concerned with, of course, telling the stories that had significance and meaning to a group of people. In the Hebrew Scriptures, it was, of course, the people of Israel. And so there's a combination of many kinds of stories, many kinds of traditions, poetry, histories, records, etc., that form what we think of now as the Hebrew Bible. And then a whole other community, the community that gathered around Jesus and his followers, who comprise the authors of the New Testament. And of course, they are telling all of these stories in various ways. They're also reflecting theologically. They're making statements about how God has acted in the lives of these two communities, the community of Israel, and as the Christians thought of themselves, the people of the New Israel. And so there is a lot of theological thought there. And between these two, I think that that's the way a lot of us tend to read Holy Scripture, as though it gives us source material about what actually happened, and then a theological reflection on what these communities of faith thought about what had happened in their lives. And in this series, we don't want to intrude on those two ways of thinking at all. They are certainly there in Scripture, they're viable, they're important, and they're interesting to our lives. But we've been making the point, I hope, that there is a third story being told throughout the pages of Scripture, and I would argue in almost every story that's told. We're just picking some of the most obvious and easiest to look at. And that is the story of the soul. We are, in this series, convinced that every human being has a soul within themselves, a deep self, and that in this space, the God that exists outside of time and space is, in fact, through the Holy Spirit, connected to all of humanity and can intersect and intercede with our consciousness. So there's a voice of the soul, a voice of the deep self. It's also our contention that in the modern era, from the Renaissance kind of up to the 1950s, we, even in the church, largely sublimated, pushed down, ignored, repudiated the voice of the soul because it was a great humanist era and we were very intrigued by everything human. And it was a great era of scientific discovery and technological innovation, so we were very interested in the concrete world around us. These are both perfectly good things, and both science and technology are great aspirations for us to follow. But again, this meant that the voice of the soul got lost, and often called psychosis, neurosis, delusion. And so people who have a pretty natural ability to hear this voice often spent their lives just ignoring it, pushing it away, denying its reality, or being very cautious about talking about it and rarely integrating it. There are some exceptional stories throughout the modern era of people who have embraced this aspect of who they are, and we're very grateful for their courage. And in the postmodern world, beginning around 1950, all of a sudden there's been a renewed explosion both inside and outside the church, of exploring the voice of the soul, listening for it, and looking at ways we can integrate it into the rest of our life. That's, in a sense, the tradition that I'm coming from. Began, in my view, with the various writings of Thomas Merton, a Trappist priest who began to write in the late 1950s, reflecting on his soulful journey. But there's a myriad of authors who did that beginning in the mid 20th century, who I think have taken over the real energy of the critical growth area of the church. But we'll see if that happens. For us, we're just going to look at some of these figures that are common to us in the scriptures and see that they're stories which are familiar to us both as history and as theology, can also be stories that teach us about the voice of the soul. Before we plunge into that whole arena of guys called the prophets, though, I wanted to just take a little time today to look at three of the gals that the Hebrew scriptures actually refer to as prophets. And there's something marvelous about the three stories I'm going to share with you today. Excuse me. Because they really embrace some of the surprising both insights of the soul and the way in which the soul can lead you into life in the world. Please remember, I've always said there are kind of three great stages of experiencing the voice of the divine. They're not, locked in stone, but almost always the voice of the divine begins by encouraging us to feel okay, good, safe, enduring about ourselves, that the universe is a good place and whatever is going on in our life is part of that goodness. Secondly, to enter into the view of creation from the point of view of the Creator. And this is a mind-bending, often disturbing and problematic journey. It startled Abraham, in my view, to the point where he almost slew his son Isaac, rather than come to grips with what it meant to be in dialogue with a God who sacrifices for the sake of the creation. But then the third stage is, how does this spiritual insight that comes from the voice of the soul into consciousness actually impact real behavior and real life situations that we're really living? So we kind of look for that arc there. It's not always smoothly and evident as that, but it's kind of generally there. So the first woman I want to look at is Miriam. I think we touched on her when we looked at Moses before. But her role, it pops up a little bit. It's clear she's certainly Aaron's full sister. She may be Moses' half sister or full sister. It's unclear. But she has a lot of insight and very interesting person around Moses' birth. But right here, we're looking at her just after the Jewish people have experienced their white-knuckling escape from the Egyptian army at the Red Sea. And so it's just a very short passage. When the horses of Pharaoh with his chariots and his chariot drivers went into the sea, the Lord brought back the waters of the sea upon them, but the Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground. Then the prophet Miriam, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with tambourines and with dancing. And Miriam sang to them, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea." So I love this passage. Remember what I said about the ark always beginning with the joy of knowing that God is with you, that the universe is a good place, that God is standing with you, and that all will be well. Also remember that what we expect God to do, what we anticipate, and the kind of framework, theological framework we put around God's behavior is often profoundly challenged when we experience God as God. And then thirdly, that this experience, this inner and often deeply personal experience of the divine has real concrete and political impact in the world we share with others. Here it is in this song, which some scholars believe is one of, if not the oldest passage in Hebrew in the entire Bible. They're all come together in this one glorious song. There's this joy, sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The Lord has acted. It's a mystery to most of us exactly what concretely happened for the Hebrew people at the Red Sea, but Miriam is clear that God acted, and God kept her and her people safe. And that's what she's absolutely celebrating. Now, the next thing is, horse and rider he has thrown into the sea. This is not the gentle, nice God who's always working out things without hurting anybody. The Hebrew scriptures are not afraid of this, and actually Jesus Christ and his disciples are not afraid of looking at a world in which people hurt each other. And even in which God is kind of interacting in this hurt. Earlier on, it was clear that it was God, from the perspective of the Hebrew people, who hardened Pharaoh's heart. There's lots of ways we can look at that too. But I just love this little song. And it's in chapter 15 of the book of Exodus, if you want to go back and read it. It just pierces out in the midst of all of the stuff that the guys are doing. And I love the fact that it's women with tambourines and dancing, because one of the most basic teachings we can get is that when you're happy, be happy. When you're sad, be sad. When you're terrified, be terrified. When you're courageous, be courageous. Be the authentic human being you are. It's all through Scripture. And there was this kind of joy. But for Miriam, the view is that this joy has a source. And it's not just the fact that we got lucky at the Red Sea, or that the physical environment worked to our favor and didn't work to the favor of the charioteers of the Pharaoh's army, or whatever it was, because the modern human rational mind, and for that matter, the ancient rational mind, might have gone there. But what Miriam said is that this was a gift of God, and the gift is joyous and the gift is real. Second one is one of my favorite figures in all of Scripture as well. This is Deborah. Deborah is one of the judges, and I'm not going to go through the whole passage here, but I'd encourage you to go back and look at Judges chapter 4. Does she go on into 5? Oh yeah, I'm sorry. The Song of Deborah is in 5. That's what I'm going to read. At least part of it for you. Here is a woman in this really vitally important period in Israeli history, before the kingship, after Moses and Joshua have died, in which the 12 tribes are hanging together really by a thread. And that thread is really held by a series of people who are called judges. One of them is a woman named Deborah. She provides a lot of wisdom for people. She's seen as a charismatic. But what's fascinating is that she's also seen as the real leader when ancient Israel has to go to war against an aggressive neighbor. And so once again, we have this story when at the center of this time, the reason the book of Judges exists is that ancient Israel understood that its true king was Yahweh, that their covenant relationship was with God, and that God did not need all of the human structures of government that we rely on, or economic, or whatever. Just make it work was basically what God would say. And there will always be that which you need. And there were these various charismatic characters, all of whom are fabulously interesting people. We're probably most familiar with the stories of Samson, who I think was the last of the judges. But right in the midst of it is this woman, Deborah. I just want to read a little bit. Deborah is the judge. Her general, who had to go to war, was a guy called Barak, son of Abinoam. And this is just some of what they sang together, apparently. When locks are long in Israel, when the people offer themselves willingly, bless the Lord. Hear, O kings, give ear, O princes. To the Lord I will sing. I will make melody to the Lord, the God of Israel. Lord, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the region of Edom, the earth trembled and the heavens poured and the clouds indeed poured water. The mountains quaked before the Lord, the one of Sinai, before the Lord, the God of Israel. So what we can do, of course, is look at this poem, and it's much longer than I'm reading here, much in the same vein with some beautiful passages in it. Again, we can look at this as an act of history. What happened in this battle? What kind of earthquakes did they experience? What kind of incredible rainstorms did they go through? All of which is reflected in this poem. We can look at it theologically. How, what are the mantras about the relationship between Yahweh and Yahweh's people is evidenced here. I want to come back again, starting with Miriam. Here we have it again in Deborah, this vibrancy, this joy we've come through a tumultuous moment in our life. And here we are safe. And once again, the voice that emerges in Deborah is a voice that bubbles up from her soul. It's not just her speaking God's word that you have to bow down and listen to. It's the merging of the touch of the divine that is within her with her actual experience in the moment. And that's where this wonderful song comes from. And it's really the way most of us when we have these experiences, we do always blend our interests, our language, our perceptions with this always joyful experience of the divine. Just as an aside, we'll see this over and over again. The trick is to be always looking for the divine voice as it may interact with various events in our lives, and not to say, oh, God was there when we won this victory. Yes, God was there when we won the victory, but it's not like God is the God of victory. And we'll see that right now as we look at Huldah. All right. We have a really hard time in the second book of Kings. It's a very tense time. Josiah is the king of Judah, and he has uncovered, or some clerk in the temple has uncovered the original Torah, which apparently they hadn't heard for a very long time. And they want to know what to do with this. So he sends, the king sends one of his priests, Hilkiah, three of his priests, I guess, four. Hilkiah, Ahikam, Akbor, Shaphan, and Asahiah. he sends out the priest to try to know what this is all about. But they went to the prophetess Huldah, the wife of Shallum, son of Tikvah. And we have this really extraordinarily lovely exchange. And we'll see that Huldah is resonated in the message of all the other prophets. Now, she's in the prophetic period. The prophetic period occurs as these men, and now as we can see, women, because they don't make anything noteworthy about this. She's just a prophetess that is there. So men and women in the period of the monarchies, when Israel has given up the period of the judges, when God is the king and these charismatic leaders appear as necessary, now we have a king and a highly sophisticated and structured governmental reality. And as we know happens, the more sophisticated the culture, quite often there are communities of people who get left behind. And Josiah becomes aware that the sins that are spoken of in the books that get read to him by his priests have just been accumulated and accumulated. And it's not just sins about how the temple worship ought to be done or what festivals ought to be recognized. And Huldah really emphasizes this. So when these priests from Josiah go to visit her, she is very clear. The moral underpinnings, the way the behavior has been, is sinful to God. It's not just that you've forgotten to worship God, it's that you've forgotten to be the community of God. Widows and orphans have suffered, injustices have been rife, greed has overcome decency and appropriate ways of interacting as a people gathered together by God. But the lovely thing is, and this is the part I want to read, spoke to you in this place, and against this has happened, that they should become desolate. I have also heard you, says the Lord. And this is Huldah speaking back to those priests, explaining what she's heard from the Lord. And she's speaking about Josiah and that coterie of people around Josiah the king who are trying to honor this word of God. And this is what she says: I will gather you to your ancestors, and you shall be gathered to your grave in peace. Your eyes shall not see all the disaster that I will bring on this place. So once again, we're at this, as we'll see with all of the prophets that we're going to look at, this section of it is the painful part of understanding our relationship with God. We come to have to understand our separation from God, but at the same time, the mercy of God and how difficult it is to hold these together. So we have Huldah, we have Deborah, and we have Miriam. And these women represent a myriad of other women throughout the Hebrew scriptures who, perhaps without all of the male responsibilities and concerns and the crushing identity crisis that's put onto men in the patriarchal era, are perhaps a little bit freer. They speak, each of these three women speak directly. It comes from the gut of their being, from what I would call the deep self, and it just comes up and it is out to the world. And in these few moments, while they look very different, they express different historical periods and different concerns. While we see God at different elements of this arc, it's evident that you can very profoundly be attuned to the Word of God within. Allow that Word to be melded with your own understanding of what's going on and have it speak to the world around you. And each of these women, I would suggest to you, are free in another moment to, again, watch for that voice, connect it with their own voice, and then respond to the real circumstance in the world they're facing. That is a rhythm of soulfulness. It's there in these three women. And if we're careful, we'll find it there in ourselves as well. Have fun with that and have a great weekend, and I'll see you again on Monday. Thanks for listening.